town was formed. So tonight, I'm going to kind of fast forward you through 1811 through 2001, so put your seatbelts on. We're going to zip along. It's so hard, of course, to cover everything and know what to cover, and there's so many things that really deserve a talk all on their own. They might be mentioned in here, but I don't go into depth about a lot of things. As we know, Candor was settled in 1794 after the ex-soldiers of the Indian Wars came through the area. By 1800, there were more than 100 settlers already, mostly of the Congregational faith, who lived in Candor and who had migrated here from Connecticut. Their main interest in settling was in lumbering, along with subsistence farming and growing corn and wheat. Those early settlers were industrious, they were self-sufficient, and they had a penchant for survival because the winters here could be very harsh, and in those days, survival was a daily chore. Settlers had to depend on the land for their livelihood, hunting, trapping, fishing, and planting crops, as well as using the timber for their homes, their furniture, transportation in the form of wagons and boats, and for heating and cooking. Later, small mercantiles and industries crowded the dirt streets throughout the area. By the time the turnpike connected the Susquehanna to Cayuga Lake through Candor, there were many small villages and hamlets that became established, several of which became part of the town of Candor, such as Weltonville, Catatonk, Wilseyville. By 1820, there were 1,665 residents in the town. It grew from 100 in 20 years to 1,665. At that time, there were two villages, Candor Corners and Candor Center, intersected by the Catatonk Creek. Without going into a lot of village history, it is interesting to note that because of the close proximity of these two villages, there was social feuding, and it went on for years. Whether it was between the two fire companies, the Alpha and Alert Hose, ball teams, shopkeepers, or residents, there would be a separation of the two until 1900, when the village came together over an issue of providing a much-needed water system. Now, because of some of this feuding, it's determined that between 1873 and 1876, there were a series of destructive fires that broke out, burning entire businesses and putting some of them out of business for good. Several had secured enough insurance to cover their loss, and their businesses continued. Others did not. And although there have been many other fires, and some disastrous ones over the years, these fires were thought to be set on purpose. For example, according to Kingman, the estimated loss of buildings, principally wooden ones, and stocks of goods during this time was placed at about $75,000. Not a lot today, but back then it was a lot of money. This loss was insured for only about half of what the loss actually was. Residents were convinced that a pyromaniac was on the loose, someone nursing a grievance that was out for revenge, or a friend of one of the other hotels or businesses. In 1873, two newspaper offices were destroyed, the Candor Free Press and the Candor Review, and they were both put out of business. Between 1873 and 75, 5 hotels had been destroyed by fire. The Young Hotel, which was not quite finished, Murray's Hotel, 2 Willard Hotels, and the Eagle Hotel. It was so bad that a mass meeting of the citizens was held and a reward of $1,000 was posted. No one was ever apprehended. No one ever got the money. The first of the fires was at the Candor Free Press. Mr. Graves, who was the owner, had a unique way of advertising subscribers whose accounts were in arrears. He published a list of names and cataloged them as deadbeats in hopes that he would shame them into paying up. It was felt that someone became infuriated and burned the place down. At Candor Center, the original wooden buildings on the corner of Mill and Spencer, McCarty and Company General Store, as well as parts of the store next door, Preston's Mercantile, burned on the morning of February 15, 1874. And each building was 2 stories in height, but the Preston building was built of brick and didn't get much damage. However, the fire originating in the rear of Preston's store went over into McCarty and Company, and burnt the building down. In March 1875, the Spalding Flouring Mill, which was along the Catatrunk Creek about a mile or so south of the village, burned, also thought to have been set on fire. And the central house at the present site of the loft was also burned, although this was thought to be accidental. In 1875, W.H. Andrews General Store, Joseph Frank's Clothing Store, and the Willard Hotel, also known as the American Hotel, which was built in 1826 by Daniel Hart on the corner of Owego and Front Street. Front Street, I don't know if many of you remember, used to be, let's see, where are we? By St. Mark's Church. That road right there used to be called Front Street. It's now all part of Main Street, but when it was separated with the two villages, that used to be called Front Street. So if you're ever doing any research and you find a Front Street in Candor, that's where it was. This was another site, by the way, of another disastrous fire. The fire had broken out in the woodshed of the hotel, where there was like 50 cord of wood that had been stored. Again, all of these fires, no one was ever identified as how they were set or who set them. But the last of the long series of these fires occurred on August 23, 1876, and it wiped out a whole row of wooden buildings where Fitzpatrick's now stands, including 2 hotels. The business places which were affected by the fire were Walker's Cigar Store, John J. Hedges' Shoe Shop, J.R. and C. Chidsey's Meat Market, J.O. Frost Furniture Store, and Chas F. Doyle's House. So that's kind of the type of businesses that were in that area at that time. Earlier, between 1825 and 1855, lumbering had become an important industry in Candor. Timber was exported even then, and abundant supplies of hemlock supported a number of tanneries in the community. General farming was also important, and even maple syrup became a prime cash crop. By 1825, 8,350 acres of land in Candor were under cultivation. And by 1855, 30,769 acres, or 3/5 of the town's area, was being farmed in Candor. The growth of the community was affected greatly, not only by the turnpike, but by the railroad that was completed in 1834. The Ithaca-Owego Railroad had several owners over the course of its run. The Cayuga-Susquehanna in 1842, and then the Delaware-Lackawanna and Western in 1855. For over 150 years, the tracks brought goods, passengers, and businesses to and through Candor, although as a passenger train, the D&W stopped transporting in the 1942s. In 1957, the last train rode out of town, and by 1959, the tracks were pulled up. But Candor had another railroad, and it ran from Utica to Elmira, coming through Ithaca, Wilseyville, and cutting across Gridleyville, West Candor, and into Spencer and points beyond. In 1855, the Ithaca-Cortland merged with the Utica-Horseheads-Elmira Railroad to form the Utica, Ithaca, and Elmira Railroad. It was later sold and renamed the Elmira, Cortland, and Northern Railroad Company. And in 1896, Lehigh Valley bought them out, and it became their Cortland branch. In 1961, passenger service in the Lehigh ended in Tioga County as a whole. Now, before I go any farther, and because I'm talking about the railroads, I want to introduce Bob Weber, because he has a show and tell for us that I think is exciting. You want to come up? You got to bring it all the way up. Not quite a train.
Well, probably a lot of you know what this is, and maybe...
How many know what this is? I want hands. No one.
No, it's from the engine.
Maybe,
No.
maybe more of you if you walked up to the Main Street above the lower bridge and on the west side of the street. You would have walked by this up until 1958. It's the mile marker of the old railroad. according to the timetable of the railroad, the station was 224 miles, 224.1 miles from Hoboken,
Oh, my.
which was the terminus of the railroad. So, anyway, I'll make an offer. If anyone's got a picture of this in its original site, I'll pay your dues for 1 year.
Thank you. That's great.
Can I mention
Oh,
something
sure,
else?
sure.
A couple of years ago, we had our woodlot surveyed by Mr. Scott Edsel, and I'd never been to check out where he put the stake for the southeast corner of it. So the other day I went up to find out where the stake was. I just followed the flags that the surveyors put on the trees and what have you, and eventually came to the stake. But as I stood there looking around, I realized here is a large circle of stone. Now, since that's the corner of Lot 20, Captain Joel Smith surveyed these lots in, what was it, 1793. This would have been how he marked the corners of these lots, with a large circle of stone, because they weren't about to be packing any iron stakes for them. They were out there in the wilderness carrying their survey instruments and a chain, which is a measuring device, so many chains and links, and what food they needed to survive, probably a gun to shoot game, supplement their meager supplies, and had to sleep in the open, so maybe they might have had a tent, maybe not. But
How big is that circle?
huh? It was probably about 3 feet diameter.
How thick? Was it a mile?
No way of knowing because I didn't dig down. I just brushed off the leaves and took several pictures of it. It was about, I would guess, 4 feet north and a foot west of where Mr. Edsel put his stake. So I'm going to ask him who was right. Was Captain Smith right or was he right?
It's close anyway.
Yeah, close enough. So anyway,
Okay.
that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, by 1850, the population had increased to 3,433. Candor was considered a post village, which meant that it was entitled to regular deliveries of mail and newspapers. By 1880, lumbering had just about disappeared. Tanneries that had existed in conjunction with the lumbering business were closing down. There were new methods of agriculture. The horse and plow took the place of the slow oxen, and for a long period of time, agriculture reigned supreme. And by 1875, 5/6 of the total acreage in Candor was being farmed. It's a lot. There were over 501 farms in operation, with an average of 101 acre per farm. Butter was a cash crop and was pulled from cellar storage barrels and shipped to local markets twice a year. However, farming was not a very lucrative business in the area over time. Although it was a dominant enterprise in Candor, prices of farm commodities in the post-Civil War period were low. Farmers started shifting to dairy husbandry, which sprouted several agricultural societies in the area. And in 1855, the County Agricultural Society was formed. In 1875, the Candor Grange number 203 was formed, which was replaced as 1111 in 1907 and later reorganized as 1466 in 1920. The main function of the Grange was to serve as a community center for its members, a place where the community could participate in all kinds of events, including playing a big part in legislative matters at all levels of government. Members gave aid to neighbors in need and improvements for the good of the community. It held educational and health-related programs such as baking, sewing, art, and photography, and was instrumental in fundraising for the good of the community. Although small in membership today, Candor still maintains their organization on Main Street. In 1880, there was a population of 4,323, and 3/4 of this population lived on farms. But due to soil exhaustion and the farmers' inability to adapt new mechanical machines and farming methods to the rolling hillsides, general farming declined due to the competition with more of the fertile and flatlands of the Midwestern states. By 1920, 20% of the farms in Candor were deserted. And in 1930, the number of operating farms had decreased to 365. Again, this was caused by depressed farming conditions as well as industrial opportunities that arose during World War I and II, which saw an upheaval of the population in Candor. Immigrants started to arrive, taking over many of these non-producing farms. Polish and Ukrainians came here to fulfill their American dream of owning land, leaving behind industrial and coal mining jobs. They made up 10% of the population of Candor. They brought with them their own religious, fraternal, and social organizations, settling in various parts of the town. By the 1950s, the Polish immigrant was one of the largest groups in the town of Candor, mostly in the Catatonk area. Other ethnic groups included a few Finns, Germans, Italians, and Irish. In combination with the farm decline, modern industrialization began to drive local industry out, and in the early 1900s, factories, craft specialists, and mills almost disappeared right before the community's eyes. The local market became mail order, business property was left to deteriorate, and little or no new construction took place at that time. But the development of the mass-produced gasoline engines allowed for new local businesses such as gas stations, repair shops, and road construction and maintenance crews. This assisted the dairy farmer in allowing farm tractors, the milk trucks, and other mechanical milk processing methods to increase the development of dairy farming and milk production in the area, and to get it to a more urban market faster. In 1930, the population had decreased to 2,564, and by 1940 had started to increase slightly, 2,601. These were the war years. It was a time of flux. Although the wars took their toll, country cousins were moving to the city, and city cousins were moving back to the country. By the mid-1950s, there were about 3,000 people living in Candor. 1,000 of those were living in the village. But although the farming community was having it rough during the last part of the 19th century, the village was experiencing prosperity. In 1896, there were 56 businesses in the village, just the village, 26 of which were stores or shops. There were 4 hotels. Can you imagine 4 hotels? 3 foundries, a blanket factory, a glove factory, carpenter shops, sawmills, and other mills. By the beginning of the 1900s, there was once again 2 newspapers, the Standard and the Gleaner. Today, Candor has a population of 5,317, and of that, 855 live in the village. Candor is the 3rd largest town population-wise, but the largest land-wise in the county of Tioga. The town of Owego's population is 20,365. And Barton is next with 9,066. Per population, however, Candor, as well as Spencer, has the highest percentage of diversity at 4%. Owego's is only 5%. This includes Black, African American, American Indian, and Alaska Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander, and Hispanic. This does not include the diverse nationality of the immigrants that migrated to Candor in its growing years. But with the diversity of the people comes the diversity of the churches that these people belong to. With 4 original churches starting out in the early 1800s, we now have 16 churches scattered about Candor. The original 4 are the Allen Memorial Baptist Church, Candor Congregational Church, McKendree United Methodist Church, and St. Mark's Episcopal Church. And the other current churches are the Catatonk Baptist Church, Christian Union Church, Fairfield United Methodist Church, Grace Bible Church, Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witness, Living Water Fellowship, and Lord Church. All show, pardon?
I forgot my glasses.
Oh,
And got it drunk. They were from- it was
well, you
from-
know, I had it in there once, and I rewrote this.
Yeah, because it was,
Yes,
built in 1930. But they, well, anyway.
It's okay. They show the broad spectrum of beliefs in Candor's religious composition. But even so, there were several other churches that have gone. Some of them have fallen, literally. Others have converted to homes or other building structures. But business-wise, Candor is certainly as diverse as ever. According to today's statistics provided by the Tioga County Office of Economic Development and Planning, there are over 300 businesses within the town and village of Candor. This includes bank, retail stores, small manufacturing firms, utilities, farms, and cottage industries. Gone are the millinery shops, furniture stores, general stores, along with the blacksmiths, woolen mills, tanneries, glove factory, creameries, hotels, and other trades of the 19th and even the early part of the 20th century. However, taking their places are auto shops and used car dealers, oil companies, gas stations and fabricating and trucking, construction, excavating, concrete pumping, surveyors, and tree removal services. Instead of many hotels, Candor has 3 bed and breakfasts, the Edge of Time, Homestar Inn, and Fields of Far. Instead of several grocery stores, there's only one, La George's. However, with today's stop-and-go lifestyle, convenience stores have fulfilled the one-stop shopping need, such as the 96 Connection, Extra Mart, and Quicks in Wilseyville. With today's lifestyle, there are businesses that define Candor's current needs and interests. Exercise gyms, Bill's Gym and Faye's Fitness Center, cater to both men and women, and 2 massage therapists. Keeping in Touch Massage Therapy and Candor Massage Therapy and Wellness Center are available in this area. Recreational businesses exist as well, including Buckridge Nudist Camp, Turkey Trot Acres, Catatonk Golf Club, Phil Jordan's Psychic Service, and Hilltop Lake. Some of the same types of businesses that we have today as we did in yesteryears include photography, farm service, feed and equipment, as well as home improvement and beauty shops. Although our local paper is published outside of Candor, Candor still has a print shop in town, the Scanner. As for farming, Candor's initial farms were what we would call alternative farming today. Sheep raising, chicken farming, fruit and vegetable farming such as apples, potatoes, maple syrup, tobacco, and other such commodities before turning to dairy farming. Today, dairy farming is done on a larger scale than the subsistence farming of yesterday, and there are only a handful left. But there are several alternative farming businesses in operation, such as Iron Kettle Farm, Follow Hollow Deer Farm, Side Hill Acres Goat Farm, Delrick Farms, Bass Haven Hatchery, Hilltop Farm, and West Candor Maple. But I noticed something happening when I was doing this research, that child care has become a big business and a necessity in Candor. Starting back in the middle of the 20th century, when women found that they had to leave their homes to go to work, not only to help out in the war effort, be it working in a factory to make garments for soldiers or to help assemble parts for military equipment, but to maintain a status quo in the household for rising prices and lack of products. In the first part of the 20th century, women still managed through a depression when food was rationed and stamps were at a minimum. They raised their young, taught school, administered first aid through organizations such as the Red Cross and church groups, and joined other women's organizations not only for enjoyment, but to foster a better way of life through their continued learning, be it a literary club, home and demonstration group, church, or an educational group. By the middle of the 20th century, 3 book clubs were formed in Candor. A Mother's Club, which was later reorganized into the Community Club, who introduced the Candor Free Library. Auxiliaries to fraternal groups such as the Red Men, Odd Fellows, Masons, and later the Fire Department, American Legion, as well as others were organized. The struggle for women's rights and equality started in 1820, and it wasn't until 1920 that women gained the right to vote. In between times, women across America endured ridicule, as well as physical hardships, and excuse me, and their leaders fought not just for the vote, but they fought for full social, political, and economic equality. It was through the civil rights movement, later branching out into the widespread women's rights movement, tempered by the temperance movement, that women were finally given the right to vote. And you must remember, men voted this in. It wasn't women, because women couldn't vote on this issue. By 1960, according to the Census of Population from the U.S. Department of Commerce, women made up 40% of the labor force. That percentage has increased dramatically by the year 2000. And because it takes men and women to earn a family living today, child care, I bet you're wondering when I was going to get to this, and homes and facilities are widespread in Candor today, with places like Peacock Playhouse, Dorothy's Daycare, Dee's Family Daycare, Happy Tots Daycare, Rainbow Connection, and Growing Years Children's Center, not to mention at least 20, that of individuals that care for other people's children in their home. Now, an organization that had an impact in Candor over the years was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, assisted by several of the church groups that aided in the campaign for Candor to become a dry town. As you know, Candor today is a wet town with 2 local bars, one in Wilseyville and one in the village. But that wasn't always the case. Matter of fact, at one time, all of Tioga County was dry, but not for long. At a special meeting in 1846, the town of Candor met at the home of G. Hubbard's, where they voted that there should not be any license given by the Board of Excise to sell intoxicating liquors in Candor. There were a total of 452 votes that day, with 296 voting against. The annual town meeting on February 1846, a year later, reversed the decision, and the town went wet. It was back and forth. Although organized temperance sentiment in the U.S. is traced back to 1808, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, or WCTU, was organized in 1874 when the interest was revived nationwide. By 1820s, people in the United States were drinking, on average, 7 gallons of pure alcohol per person each year. Just think, a lot of people didn't drink at all. So that you know, they're averaging everybody into this. By 1855, it had fallen to only 2 gallons of absolute alcohol per person consumed. However, after the Civil War and an increase in population, there were 100,000 saloons in the country, and because of increasing competitiveness for the drinkers' wages, many saloons permitted things such as gambling, prostitution, sales to minors, public drunkenness, and violence. And in reaction to this, a women's war broke out in 1873. By 1900, men joined this cause against a business that threatened the family way of life. Now, in Candor in 1894, a vote for license and a lockup was sabotaged by ballots with unclear wording, according to those who wanted a wet town. The vote for license again went dry in 1896 by 64 votes. It's not many votes. 2 days prior to that vote, however, there was a huge temperance rally that filled Candor Hall to overflowing, swaying the vote. Druggists, however, were still allowed to sell under doctor's orders. And in 1899, Frederick Carleton and Company Productions came to Candor Hall and presented a big scenic production of 10 Nights in a Bar Room. The promotional material admonished, don't fail to see the beautiful temperance scene, Mary in Paradise, the realistic barroom scene, the murder of Simon Slade, and the death of Little Mary. Obviously, a production that supported a dry society. In 1904, another mass temperance meeting was held 3 days before the town election. They timed these just right. It was pointed out that since no license had gone into effect, Candor had enjoyed the most prosperous times in its history. However, hotel keepers, such as Charles Wolver, pointed out that the taxpayer spent $1,800 to prosecute violators with poor results, and that it was estimated that in the previous 2 years, $10,000 worth of liquor and fermented beverages were sold in a supposed temperance town, with no 1 cent in revenue for the town and county treasuries. He also alleged that plainly sealed boxes arrived on most every train and that even boys of uncertain age bought liquor. He said that Candor had become a mecca for certain bums who didn't work, but instead sold liquor out of their hip pockets. On Tuesday, February 14th, another town election was held, and all 4 excise questions were defeated. A few other dates and interesting facts I just couldn't leave out. To license or not to license include the following. In 1908, the local pool hall was Carrie Nationed. Tables and cues were wrecked, pool balls thrown into Cataton Creek, and a cask of hard cider was dumped. Most of the liberated liquid ended up below in the Candor Courier's storeroom, requiring applications of chloride of lime and disgruntled cleanup. In 1916, a women's suffrage headquarters was set up at Candor Hall, and a house-to-house canvass made to promote the women's suffrage amendment. In 1917, Candor's for vote on women's suffrage did not change much from 1915, and the no vote went out again. Again, women didn't have the right to vote at this time. In 1920, however, women gained the right to vote, but the Women's Christian Temperance Union was in full swing, and by the 1930s, so was Prohibition. According to the Candor Courier, on February 13, 1930, the following account was reported. Federal officers visited Candor last Friday and raided 4 places where more or less intoxicating beverages were seized and destroyed. All were ordered to appear before U.S. Commissioner Fred J. Davis in Owego. Apparently, these locations had been under surveillance for some time, according to The Sun, which stated that these places were doing a land office business. And in August that year, the WCTU held their annual picnic at Mrs. Lila Whalen's. All members, their families, the pastor and families, the young boys and girls from 13 to 30 years, and the Loyal Temperance Legion were invited. Mrs. Mabel Adams was the leader. The WCTU was an interdenominational organization, and the invitations to these banquets and events were extended to the mothers and daughters of the entire community. Remember, a lot of the church groups participated. Temperance Union of Tioga County opened the Millstream Inn. Now, younger generations probably don't recall the names of some of the smaller areas that make up the town of Candor unless it's associated with a road that they drive on. Just where did these places go? With the centralization of the school voted in on November 1938 and officially taken place in 1939, and the improved transportation methods of automobiles, people living in the smaller settlements in Candor didn't need to be so dependent on their neighbors and their own self-sufficiency any longer. And they were being bused to a central school, and being bused to the central school took children and teachers out of their small communities and made it easier for families to shop farther afield for their needs, as well as getting to work, because women were working now as well. By a vote of 320 to 96, the school centralization passed. With the growth of the school, Candor Village became the hub of activity for the town, although some of the larger neighborhoods still thrived, as they do today, in their own way, such as, again, Wilseyville, Weltonville, and Catatonk. But like the churches that were scattered all over the countryside, so were the schools. Catatonk, Gridleyville, Crine's Corners, Wilseyville, Upper Fairfield, Lower Prospect Valley, Lounsbury, Anderson Hill, Straits Corners, Hubbardtown, Lovely Vale, Lower Fairfield, Upper Prospect Valley, Dry Brook, West Candor, Leg Hill, Cass Hill, Union Hill, and of course the Candor Free Academy until it burned in 1909. Germany Hill was a joint school district with the town of Tioga. Since 1939, Candor Central School has grown along with Candor's population. Now, this has been just a brief overview of the town of Candor between 1800 to 2001. I could have gone on, like I said before, but I didn't want anybody falling asleep in their seats. So, before I take questions, I again want to thank everybody for coming and ask for your help in continued research. As Mill had mentioned earlier, we're going to be working on a book on folk tales. There's a lot of you that I'm sure can add some wonderful stories to that. I've already gotten a few in. Historic information is still needed for the small communities out there, a lot of these school communities that I just mentioned. And I'll be trying to, dig up some information. So anybody has anything they want to share with me, please do so. So there we have it. Any questions?
Was the reason there were so many hotels, was it because the Candor was kind of a halfway point between Bloomington and Islip?
Well, Candor was a happening place. It had the town hall, and people would come into schools, and because they had to live somewhere, while they were going to school, so that